Okay. Today I want to talk about something that is very important to me, though I think it's and hope that it's important to everyone in general, but that is the importance of living in alignment with the truth. Okay. So let's talk about that for a moment. So I wrote a piece on my Substack, and I'll link it down below, but I'm also just gonna read you guys the opening paragraph from this Substack and then tell you what this means for me. So I wrote this Substack almost 2 years ago. I wrote it in April of 2023. The title is 9/11, COVID, and Me. And this is the opening paragraph. It says, there is a clear relationship between 9/11 and COVID-19. For me personally, this relationship exists for two reasons. First, I generally think it's the same networks of evil individuals that performed both acts. Second, and more specific to me, both were integral moments in defining and then refining my current worldview. Okay, so what am I getting at? All right. So I was in my third year at West Point when 9/11 occurred. So I was a junior. The academic year had just started. West Point is located 50 miles up the river from New York City. I think it's about 60 miles exactly from ground zero. Um, I've said this before. I mean, I was as hoodwinked as anybody else when 9/11 occurred. And I'm at the military academy and I'm in New York State, 60 miles from where ground zero happened. So it hit very close to home, kind of both, literally and figuratively. And I would say that the culture of West Point and the entire military, I would say it kind of changed overnight because everything that we had been working for, everything that we had been preparing for now became very real. And we all knew, maybe not necessarily that day, but very, very shortly after, we all knew that we were headed to war. And I mean, of course, that happened. A couple short years later, I would be in Afghanistan, and I don't know what the percentages are, but just using my class, which would be the class of 2003, using my class as an example, I mean, uh, I don't even know, but nearly everyone that graduated in my West Point class deployed to a combat zone, within a short time of graduating, certainly at some point during their military service. I don't know what the percentage would be, but it would be very, very, very high of those who graduated West Point and at some point would deploy to a combat zone. Now, several years later, about the summer of 2007, I started to question the official story of 9/11 and became not immediately, but very quickly convinced that what we had been told was a lie. Now, this is in 2007 when I would say not a lot of people in the general public were questioning it yet. Certainly not a lot of people in the military. And um, so by that time, by the summer of 2007, I had already been on a year-long deployment to Afghanistan. And I deployed from early '06 to early '07 in Afghanistan. And I went to Afghanistan thinking that I was fighting terrorists for God and country. And as ridiculous as that sounds now, that's what I believed. I mean, I deployed, 19 years ago. I deployed January of '06 to January of '07. I believed that I was fighting terrorists for God and country before I deployed. I believe that, while I was there. I believe that when I came home. A short time later, we're talking from January of 2007 to a couple of months later in the summer of that same year, my ideas on 9/11 would change a lot. So um, I between kind of late 2007, 2008, early 2009, I was kind of debating in my head, well, what do I do? I mean, I'm in the army, you know. I've already deployed to Afghanistan. Like, what do I do? So by about 2009, as I'm kicking this around, um, I had fulfilled my initial contract with the army. I could get out. So by early 2009 or so, by that point, I guess I would have been in the army for not quite 6 years. My initial contract out of West Point would have been 5. But anyway, so I actually thought I was going to get out of the army. I had made the decision that I was going to get out. Long story short, spoiler alert, I did not get out of the army. and some of you have heard this story, or if you know me at all personally, then you know obviously I didn't get out, but you may have even known that I was struggling at this time with this decision. Fast forward, a decade plus later. Now I'm stationed in South Korea. It's 2020, COVID. A year later, it's 2021. I'm back in the States. I'm taking command of a battalion. I'm now a lieutenant colonel, whereas when I'd been questioning 9/11, I was a captain. Now I'm a lieutenant colonel. Um, you know, but during that entire decade, I had not forgotten the questions I had begun to ask. No, I had never stopped doing research, and I had never stopped asking questions. And my knowledge about the corruption in government had just grown exponentially over that decade. And so when the COVID op, when that happens, and then I'm relieved of command, I see how far the military and the government are willing to go with this. And so eventually I resigned. And I resigned with, I ended up serving 19 years, 3 months, 15 days. Some of you have heard the story. And so that means that I was 8.5 years of qualifying for retirement. Now, why would I do that? Why would I do that? And again, many of you have heard the story, but I'm going to explain it from a slightly different perspective. So, yes, it's true. Of course, I didn't feel like I could reconcile continued service in this organization, meaning the military, and make good on the oath that I had taken to the Constitution. That's true. I did feel that if I were to remain in the military and receive a salary, qualify for retirement pension, and then continue to receive that pension for the rest of my life, then I would feel like I was kind of staying in the military for money. And I would consider that blood money because now I'm working for the government. The government is very clearly targeting its own citizens. And I know that. I'm speaking, myself at that time. I knew that then. I knew that. I know that much more clearly now, but I knew that in 2021. I knew that in early 2022 when I actually, made the decision to go ahead and resign. This is after I'd already been fired from my battalion command position for not taking the shot. So I could not remain in the military. So what happened between 2009 when I was considering getting out after, a year and a half of kind of studying the whole 9/11 thing and other things. You start to study 9/11, then you start pulling on that thread, you find other threads, you start pulling on those. But what happened between 2009 and 2021, 2022? So 12 or 13 years later. What happened? Well, one, I'm 13 years older, 13 more years of just general life experience, 13 more years in the military, but also just 13 more years of research. But also it's understanding that the COVID op was so much larger, so much more sinister than 9/11, which itself was very large, very complex. I do believe that there was a dark ritualistic aspect to 9/11, as there was with the COVID op. But as bad as 9/11 and as bad as 9/11 was, and 9/11 was horrific in every way. It was an op perpetrated by the worst people imaginable. And yet still the COVID op was exponentially worse. And so I had ultimately decided to stay in the military back in 2009 because I felt like whatever is going on in the government, you still need good people who adhere to virtues. You need those people to be leaders in our military. And then fast forward 12 or 13 years to 2022, and I realized that's not enough. It's not enough because our military is too far infiltrated. It's not that the system is bad, and then you've got the military that is somehow still this virtuous organization, this great institution within a bad system. Maybe that's what I thought in 2009. Maybe I wouldn't have articulated in exactly those words, but maybe that's kind of what I thought. But fast forward more than a decade, I no longer thought that the military was an outlier. I thought the military is one of the worst components of this evil system because often it's the military that is actually at the forefront of targeting innocent people, whether abroad or also domestically, even when it's done from the shadows and people don't readily recognize that it is the military. Now, are there good people in the military? Yes. Did I learn a lot in the military? Did I learn great things? Am I very happy to have served 19 years in the military and another 4 before that at West Point? Yes, 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 yes. But I'm most proud of the fact that I walked away when it was time to walk away. When I realized, and it was irrefutable in my own mind, that the military was corrupt and it could not be repaired from the inside. That's when I said, I'm going to take off the uniform and I will continue to fight for my country. But I will not fight for my country in this institution that has become an enemy of the country and is a component of the United States government, which itself is an enemy of this country and the citizens. Because here's the thing. For a decade or so, I had almost lived in like this state of cognitive dissonance where, I mean, because I deployed again to Afghanistan after knowing that the whole 9/11 story was bullshit. So I deployed as early as 2006. I deployed as late as 2016 to Afghanistan. So nearly a decade later in Afghanistan, I know the whole narrative is bullshit, but there I am. Now, I would not have told you that I was living a lie, but even I would have recognized at the time that it's almost like, I don't know, maybe it's not cognitive dissonance if you recognize it, but it's understanding that you personally hold beliefs that are very different than what this institution that you're part of holds. I mean, I would listen to the most nonsensical statements from leaders of mine who were either just straight up lying or they were just making comments that maybe they assumed they were true, but they had clearly never done any research. I'll tell you this. So in 2021, probably my first week in battalion command, the outgoing brigade commander, so he would have been my boss for like a week. Then he left command and was replaced by another guy. This guy stood up and said in front of this is 2021. He stood up in front of, an entire formation of his brigade and started talking about 9/11. This is in 2021, so the summer of 2021, almost 20 years later. And this colonel who's been in the Army for, I don't know how long he'd been in the Army. 26 or more years, probably, yeah, probably 25 or more years. Anyway, he doesn't know, he doesn't know that the whole narrative of 9/11 is bullshit. He probably didn't. He probably wasn't lying. He's just naive. But this is a guy who had just commanded a brigade in the Army, 4,000 plus soldiers. He had just commanded a brigade in the Army for 2 years. And he's up there talking about 9/11. And what did I think when he was doing that? I thought, you are a fool. You are a fool. You just spent 2 years commanding 4,000 plus troops of the United States Army, and you're a fool. You're either a liar or you're a fool. I'm going to assume you're just a fool. But that's the problem. So here I am hearing this. It's the summer of 2021. I've been in battalion command for less than a week. I'm listening to this colonel spout pure bullshit because he doesn't know any better. He doesn't know any better because he's just listening to the bullshit that he gets from the media or that he gets from his superiors. And he doesn't bother to go do his own research or figure out what the truth is. And then he's going to spread that bullshit to thousands of his own soldiers. Because at the end of the day, he doesn't actually care about the truth. Because 20 years after 9/11, if you have not woken up by then, by 2021, it's because you do not care. It's because you do not care. Because there's so many red flags about the 9/11 story that if 20 years pass and you still haven't figured out that what you were told was a lie, it's because you are willfully ignorant at that point. I totally understand being duped, but being duped for 20 years when so many people are asking questions, yeah, it's unacceptable. So anyway, so what's my point? So my point is in between that decade plus time period, I just realized that the military, and I'm not somebody who doesn't believe in the military. I believe in, a strong national defense, but that's not what we have. We have an organization in the military that is that runs directly counter to the reasons for which it should exist. That's my problem. And most of what the military does is predicated upon lies. And so the reason that I had to leave the military is because I refused to live this lie. I knew that the military was the enemy of the American people, and I wasn't going to be a part of it. I wasn't going to be a part of it. And nothing has changed. People talk about Trump, they talk about Hegstep. Nothing has changed. It is still the enemy. It is the enemy. And until it stops targeting American citizens, it will still be the enemy. I don't care what they tell you. I don't care what, small actions they do to fool you. They continue to target American citizens. That makes them the enemy. I can't explain it any other way. So I refuse to live a lie. That doesn't make me some hero. That doesn't make me a great person. All it means is that I did something that we should all be willing to do. Stop living a lie. I'm going to tell you, there's somebody who said this much better than I did, and his name is Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Some of you will, of course, be familiar with who this is. This is the Soviet dissident who also served in the army. Was I think a captain in the Soviet army, the Red Army, and then later would spend 8 or 9 years in the Gulag, and then would be exiled to the West. So this is an essay appropriately called "Live Not by Lies" that Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote. And interestingly enough, it's already 50 years old. It's actually 51 years old. So I'm going to read this introduction to the essay, and I'm going to read a couple paragraphs from the essay. I'm not going to read it in its entirety, even though it is quite short, but I will link the I'll link the essay in the description of this video so you can go read it. I would encourage you to read it in its entirety. It'll only take you a few minutes. And if you do read it, then tell me in the comments on this video what you thought of it. But here's an introduction. So this is an introduction by two other authors about this essay. But here's what it says. On the day Solzhenitsyn was arrested, February 12th, 1974, he released the text of "Live Not by Lies." The next day, he was exiled to the West, where he received a hero's welcome. This moment marks the peak of his fame. Solzhenitsyn equates lies with ideology, the illusion that human nature and society can be reshaped to predetermined specifications. And his last word before leaving his homeland urges Soviet citizens as individuals to refrain from cooperating with the regime's lies. Even the most timid can take this least demanding step towards spiritual independence. If many march together on this path of passive resistance, the whole inhuman system will totter and collapse. Okay, so those words are not from Solzhenitsyn. That is an introduction by Edward E. Erickson Jr. and Daniel J. Mahoney to this. It was kind of put here as an intro to this essay. All right, so all right, I'm going to read. All right, so here this is from the essay. This is from Solzhenitsyn. It says, "We are approaching the brink. Already a universal spiritual demise is upon us. A physical one is about to flare up and engulf us and our children, while we continue to smile sheepishly, and babble. But what can we do to stop it? We haven't the strength." All right, I'm going to pause right there. How many of you have heard? I hear that all the time, but what can we do? What can we do? All right, I'm going to keep going on. All right, here we go. I'm going to read this paragraph. "And therein we find, neglected by us, the simplest, the most accessible key to our liberation, a personal non-participation in lies. Even if all is covered by lies, even if all is under their rule, let us resist in the smallest way. Let their rule not hold through me. And this is the way to break out of the imaginary encirclement of our inertness, the easiest way for us and the most devastating for the lies. For when people renounce lies, lies simply cease to exist. Like parasites, they can only survive when attached to a person. Our way must be never knowingly support lies. Having understood where the lies begin, and many see this line differently, step back from that gangrenous edge. Let us not glue back the flaking scales of the ideology, not gather back its crumbling bones, nor patch together its decomposing garb. And we will be amazed how swiftly and helplessly the lies will fall away, and that which is destined to be naked will be exposed as such to the world. And thus, overcoming our timidity, let each man choose. Will he remain a witting servant of the lies? Needless to say, not due to natural predisposition, but in order to provide a living for the family, to rear the children in the spirit of lies? Or has the time come for him to stand straight as an honest man, worthy of the respect of his children and contemporaries? And from that day onward, he will not write, sign, nor publish in any way a single line distorting, so far as he can see, the truth. Will not utter such a line in private or in public conversation, nor read it from a crib sheet, nor speak it in the role of educator, canvasser, teacher, actor. Will not in painting, sculpture, photograph, technology, or music depict, support, or broadcast a single false thought, a single distortion of the truth as he discerns it. Will not cite in writing or in speech a single guiding quote for gratification, insurance for his success at work, unless he fully shares the cited thought and believes that it fits the context precisely. I'm going to skip a couple of paragraphs. This is by no means an exhaustive list of the possible and necessary ways of evading lies, but he who begins to cleanse himself will, with a cleansed eye, easily discern yet other opportunities. Yes, at first it will not be fair. Someone will have to temporarily lose his job. For the young who seek to live by truth, this will at first severely complicate life. For their tests and quizzes, too, are stuffed with lies. And so choices will have to be made. But there is no loophole left for anyone who seeks to be honest, not even for a day. Not even in the safest technical occupations can he avoid even a single one of the listed choices. To be made in favor of either truth or lies, in favor of spiritual independence or spiritual servility. And as for him who lacks the courage to defend even his own soul, let him not brag of his progressive views, boast of his status as an academician, or a recognized artist, a distinguished citizen or general. Let him say to himself plainly, I am cattle. I am a coward. I seek only warmth and to eat my fill. All right. How many of us know people like that? If you know people like that, according to Solzhenitsyn, and he's saying it, not me, he's a much better man than me. He's saying those individuals should recognize what they are. They are cattle. They are cowards. And they are those who are afraid to speak the truth. Now, I opened this by talking about 9/11 COVID in Me, which is a Substack that I wrote. So I'm going to read something here. This is the closing line of this Substack that I wrote. And I said, I don't know whether staying in the Army in 2009 was the correct thing to do, but I absolutely know that leaving in 2022 was the right call for me. So we all need to align with the truth. And that means that we need to refuse to live by lies. The government is still lying to you. You know, I can't believe how many people just look at the theatrics of politics and assume that it represents reality. It's not reality. Stop listening. I mean, stop giving them not just your consent, but even your your concern, your care. I mean, the government is not your friend. Okay. I'm not anti-government. I'm not. I have friends who are, who are voluntarists, or some of them might even consider themselves, anarchists in the philosophical meaning of the term. That's not me. I'm not. Um, but that doesn't mean that I in any way support what our government has done against its own citizens and plenty of other people around the world for a very, very long time, longer than any of us have been here. Furthermore, I do believe that the government is itself just a vassal of or a colony of a much larger, dark, sinister empire. And so, what can we do? Well, let's align with truth and let's refuse to live by lies. And so, I think that Solzhenitsyn's words should, first of all, I think they ring true. And I think that they should resonate with all of us if we say that we love truth. And I know many of you out there would say that you love truth. That doesn't mean that we're perfect. That doesn't mean that we don't make mistakes. That doesn't mean that we understand everything perfectly. I fully understand how people can be fooled. That I get. But don't be fooled because you refuse to look for the truth. Don't be fooled or convince yourself that you've been fooled because you are afraid to look into other ideas because you're afraid of what you might find. And that's what I think has happened with a lot of these military leaders. I mean, some of the very top are probably just straight up criminals. I don't know. That's my assumption, right? Um, but there are plenty of others who are ignorant, so they don't necessarily know, but they're ignorant because that ignorance is willful, because they've been confronted with all these other competing ideas and they've refused to entertain them. Because what would it mean for their careers? Because at the end of the day, they're cowards. They're ignorant because they're cowards. They're ignorant because they're afraid to do research. They're afraid to ask the hard questions about what the government is really up to because they're afraid of what they might find. And so, what does that mean? That means they stay in an institution that itself largely operates based on lies because they don't actually have the courage to stand with their oaths they made to the Constitution or stand with the people that they pretend to defend. So that's all I have. I just want to share that, share that with you guys. So for me, 9/11 and COVID are pivotal events, not just in the history of our nation or kind of the history of our nation that has occurred during my lifetime, but also because they bookend my military career. On the one hand, you got 9/11 that happened while I was a cadet at West Point, kind of as I was embarking upon my actual Army career. And then you have, of course, the COVID op that ultimately would spell the end of my military career. So they're important for me. And I just kind of wanted to give you guys a little bit of insight into what changed in my mind during the 12 or 13 years kind of in between me coming to some conclusions about 9/11 that were counter to the official narrative. And then what happened in my career, as we got towards the end of it with the COVID op, and as I was trying to wrap my head around all of that, and then making some decisions about what I was going to do with the Army. So anyway, appreciate you guys tuning into this video, and I would encourage you to read two things. So I'm going to give you a little bit of homework. So read that essay, "Live Not by Lies," and if you feel so inclined, go read my Substack, which I'll also link below. COVID, 9/11, and me. And if you do read those and you like them, or if you don't like them, let me know in the comments. I appreciate it. All right, you guys have a good one.